Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as a director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series for Bachelors of Architecture. The subject we are discussing is Human Settlements Planning. The topic we will be delving into is issues in contemporary urban planning in India. In this unit, we shall be discussing urbanization, emergence of new forms of developments. To begin with, urbanization. Urbanization is nothing but the process by which where there is an increase in the population in the urban area or such areas known as cities or larger towns. So, there is a constant movement of population from rural or lesser developed areas to cities or better developed areas. So, urbanization occurs because people move from rural areas to urban areas in search of a better life opportunities, better livelihood. Amongst the first countries to become urbanized were Great Britain and some European countries. Their urbanization was relatively slow, allowing governments time to plan as well as provide for the needs of the increasing urban populations. Now, just for an idea of taking a look at the different rate of urbanization across the globe. In Hong Kong, the urban population is said to be 100% of the total population, and all of this data is from 2010. The rate of urbanization is 0.9%. Qatar, urban population is 96% of the total population, and the rate of urbanization is 1.6%. If you look at India, the urban population is 30% of the total population. So, compared to the other countries in the world, it is very much smaller. But if you look at the rate of urbanization, it is 2.4%, and that is the annual rate of change. It keeps increasing. And so, again, if you look at that as the rate of urbanization is one of the highest in the globe. So, as a trend, you see India is constantly urbanizing. Different cities are getting more and more populated. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, which is very close to India, again the urban population is only 14%, but the rate of urbanization is relatively much slower as 1.1%. So, an ideal situation is having either a smaller number of urban population, and even if the rate of urbanization should be relatively smaller, so it allows for the government or the infrastructure to develop before the urbanization process occurs, so as to reduce the drawbacks of this process. Now, as a case study, we look into the urbanization in South Africa. In South Africa, the process of urbanization as such was very rapid, and it began in the 1950s. So, when the process is rapid, we will see the drawbacks that occur because of that. Huge demands on land, water, housing, transport and employment, and not all people enjoy the same standard of living. So, there is a huge difference in the economic strata in society. You have a very low income group or below poverty line income group, as well as you have some very rich people and a very high income or rich strata in society. Many urban people live in closely built shacks made of packing cases, sheets of plastic and corrugated iron. So, there is nothing as such as a standardized dwelling unit. It leads to the formation of slums. Some urban people have a good supply of water and electricity, again not uniform. Waste from bathrooms and toilets goes directly into the city sewers. Squatters, however, lack these benefits and are forced to use open drains and pit toilets. Obviously, these cause a lot of health hazards and epidemic situations. In South Africa, the whole concept of apartheid was also going on. It has obviously made the problems even more complex, as well as the process of urbanization is not as straightforward as it is in other parts of the globe. For generations, urbanization of black people was made difficult by forcing them to live in areas far from the cities. Separation of families created many social problems. In addition, past laws made it illegal for many black people to live in white cities. Their illegal status made it impossible for them to rent a house, so they often lived in a shack. So there were a lot of social problems in society, class issues, race issues in society that is obviously evident in the process of urbanization. If you look at the status of the squatters, the shortage of accommodation in cities has forced them to live in shack towns or squatter camps on open land. If you actually see, there is a lot of similarities between India and South Africa. It is not as dire as it is there, but again here you have slums, squatters, and even here there is a very stringent caste system and a society based on different communities and based on different occupations. Although squatter settlements are seen to arise of desperate need, the landowners are often unhappy that squatters are living on their land. Then the state will have to make provision for future emergency housing for such poor people. So from this you can actually get to some very general conclusions. The slower the urbanization process occurs, the easier it is to deal with it. Urban conflicts will be greatest where urbanization is greatest. In South Africa, the most rapid urbanization is occurring amongst the largest cities. So if the problems of urbanization are not solved, social unrest and environmental pollution will still get worse. Now we will go on to the causes of urbanization. What began this phenomenon or process? Number one, obviously it is the industrial revolution. As a result of industrial revolution happened industrialization, where the importance actually shifted from agriculture to manufacturing, and from manufacturing to a very important service sector. So gradually the gears have been shifted, and man has also found alternate occupations, and along with alternate occupations come in alternate towns and living arrangements. Emergence of large manufacturing centers, job opportunities, availability of easy transportation and migration. So man is the only animal on earth who always has a sense of unrest. There is a sense inside man that what better lies beyond our boundary. It is because of the sense of unrest that the whole process of migration happens, and the sense of moving to a new town will give us better opportunities. That hope always keeps man moving from place A to place B. Now we will move on to the effects of urbanization. Like anything, it has two sides of a coin. It has the positive and the negative. We look into the positive aspects at the first. Benefits include reduced transportation cost, exchange of ideas and sharing of natural resources. Cities act as beacons for the rural population, and because they represent a higher standard of living. Cities offer opportunities to people which is not available in the countryside or in the rural areas. Social and religious taboos or sanctions keep disappearing. That is, the line of the caste system is obviously less felt in a city because there are other things that take precedence. Education is a tool to eradicate social evils. Industrialization, urbanization, education, legislation, secularization, sequence of development. Finally, diffusion of urban culture to rural areas. Now moving on to the negative aspects. Industrial cities were difficult places to live in due to public health issues resulting from contaminated water, air, and they spread a lot of communicable diseases due to overcrowding. And because of too many people moving into a city simultaneously and with no control, it leads to a lot of unemployment as well as underemployment. Severe shortage of housing again leads to squatters and illegal settlements, transportation commuting issues, lack of public transportation, as there is no adequate investment either from the public sector or even from the private sector, because the urbanization as a process was not scheduled or did not happen in a scaled manner. Social effects, poverty, lack of opportunities, physiological problems, psychological problems, alcoholism, drugs, crime, violence and other deviant behaviors. All of these result from inadequate urbanization, in the sense without having the proper backing or infrastructure. If suddenly there are throngs of people move into a city, all of these problems arise. With respect to public health, sanitation is a main issue. The settlements were ill-equipped to handle large populations and their sanitation needs. Pollution, which is caused by emissions from factories and other industries, and that mixed with the pollution from transportation leads to smoke and smog. Fire hazards due to use of flammable materials and proximity and over congestion. Epidemics due to the spread of communicable diseases caused by contaminated water and air. Unemployment is the condition where willing workers lacking jobs or gainful employment. Before industrialization, unemployment has not been said to be recognized as an issue in rural areas, because family used to work together. So, if one person was not employed as such, you will not recognize that as a sense of unemployment. So, it was referred to as disguised unemployment. You can't, when an entire family is working in the field, that field might require only 4 adults to work in, but all the 10 members would work in the same fields. So, it was actually having 6 adults extra was considered as disguised unemployment, because it is considered extra and not required. But in the rural scenario, it was not felt like that. It was only when urbanization occurred and you had the manufacturing jobs and the service sector jobs arising, that you realize that okay, this is extra. These people are not required and only so many people are required to do certain things, because the machines were there and we could quantify the amount of labor that was going to be outsourced to human beings. So, the rural situation actually helped us prevent the whole concept of unemployment. And what was the impact of unemployment on society? On individuals, there is a failure to meet financial obligations such as purchasing food to either feed oneself or even the immediate family, paying one's bills, failure to make mortgage payments or to pay rent. It may lead to homelessness. Societal, what happens at a level of society is rising unemployment increases crime rate. It's because of unemployment that poverty happens, and because of poverty, man is forced to enter some illegal activities to obtain the same amount of money he would doing a legal profession. With respect to housing, overcrowding like we discussed, loss of privacy, as because in one dwelling unit where one family is supposed to live, because of overcrowding you would have 4 to 5 families living. Lack of housing contributes directly to crime, stress and breakdown of families. Shortage of livable housing leading to the growth of slums. Human beings have a right to lead a life of dignity, which again was slowly deteriorating because of all of these above factors. With respect to transportation, it is the movement of people as well as goods from one place to another. Because of the much higher densities of people and activities in cities, transportation has always been a key issue. Inadequate or either lack of public transportation creates commuting problems leading to a loss of efficiency. And if you do not have a very good transport infrastructure, people will tend to live right next to the factories. All the people, because they don't have a good transportation system, okay, my place of employment is in this factory, they will all end up living around the factory, leading to very bad level, or they'll be exposed to bad effluents from the factory, say bad air, and be exposed to a general level of pollution, which causes again a lot of epidemics and other health hazards. One of the main problems, poverty. It is generally defined as the individual or family level as not having enough money to buy basic necessities. But of course, now the word poverty has been redefined in different countries in different ways, because the concept of basic necessities changes from one society to another. In a developing country like India, basic necessities is considered different, versus in a globalized, urbanized society like Europe and United States, the concept of basic necessities is entirely different. So, the level of poverty is obviously again very strategically different in different parts of the world. Poverty is caused by a lack of opportunities. Poverty causes malnutrition and illnesses. It is a major source of mental stress, loss of self-esteem, which may lead to depression and have a further negative impact on the health. Crime, again because of financial insecurity, no welfare systems in place by the government or private sectors together, lack of meaningful work, that is low importance is being given to meaningful work and high maintenance to higher profits and greater efficiency. So, what happened with industrialization is all the small jobs which were not considered or looked down upon in rural areas, once industrialization happened and people moved to cities and they saw that machines could do certain jobs, they started looking down upon certain jobs. And those, again because of that, the whole concept of menial work came into being. Certain jobs were not given respect, and people who performed those jobs obviously felt very demotivated and with very low esteem, self-esteem. Anonymity, direct correlation between higher crime rate and higher rootlessness, where one moves from the village hoping for a better life and moves into a nameless city. So, the whole person is uprooting his family and moving to a new place in search of a better livelihood, and he becomes anonymous, in the sense no one knows him. In a rural area, when there are only 500 people, the chances that they know each other, they would be known by name, by profession or by family heritage. That does not happen in a city. One becomes nameless or anonymous in a city where we are talking about lakhs of people. You are just one among the thousands or 10,000s. So, when that happens, you do not have the self-respect that you used to have. You have moved away from a place that you are not familiar with. So, all of this adds to the phenomenon of anonymity, which leads to higher crime rates and higher levels of antisocial activities. Moving on to urbanization in India, if you actually look at the proper definition of urbanization, it is the process of society's transformation from a predominantly rural to a predominantly urban population, and that is referred to as urbanization. It includes two things: an increase in the number of people living in the urban settlements and an increase in the percentage of population engaged in non-agricultural activities living in such places. So, in India, if you look at it, the urbanization process is moving away from agrarian activities. It is not enough that you move to a city. You should not even be involved in a profession related to agriculture. That is an added element of urbanization in India, because here in India, rural areas is always predominantly referred to as agricultural areas, versus urban areas are referred to as either the manufacturing sectors or the service sectors. Urban in India is defined as a human settlement with a minimum population of 5,000 people, with 75% of the male working population engaged in non-agricultural activities and a population of at least 400 people per square kilometer. Further, all statutory towns have a municipal corporation, municipal council, Nagar Panchayat, as well as a cantonment board are classified as urban. So, what are the prerequisites for an area or a town to be referred to as urban? Now, if you look at the trends in rural and urban distribution of population, this was in 1901, the census taken in India, 89.2% versus 10.8%. So, the urban was only 10.8%. In 1951, it has grown to 17.3%. So, over 50 years, it has only grown 7% nearly, versus in 2011, the urban population has grown to 31.2%. So, you can see there is an exponential growth, And because of this, when the rate of growth is slow, the government can be prepared, the public and the private sector will be prepared, and they can make the necessary requirements for this development. But when the growth is sudden or haphazard, it is difficult to do so. If you look at the other highlights with respect to India, you have a rural population difference. You can look at the difference in population versus in 2001 to 2011. The percentage has tremendously increased from 28.6% to 37.7%. So, even though there is a constant growth, where does this population keep moving? And in our country, even the rural population is constantly growing. It is not like the rural areas are emptying out and they are moving to cities. As and when the rural population is simultaneously increasing, the urban population is also increasing. So, if we look at the rural urban distribution, it is 68.84% and 31.16%. It is nearly half, and level of urbanization is increased from 27.81 in 2001 versus 31.16 in 2011. So, this change has happened in merely a decade. Now, growth of population, again, there is definitely a slowing down of the overall growth rate of population, and this is basically due to a sharp decline in the growth rate in rural areas, while the growth rate in urban areas is pretty much remain the same. Now, we will go on to discussing how the urban areas have changed. If you look at an urban unit or a town, strategically when we refer to as, when we are talking, we call them towns, but geographers and other people refer to as an urban unit, like how we have a dwelling unit. All places with a municipality, corporation, cantonment board or notified town area committee is referred to as a statutory town. All other places which satisfy the following criteria is referred to as a census town. Minimum population of 5,000, at least 75% of the main workers are engaged in non-agricultural pursuits, and density of population 400 per square kilometer. So, if you look at it, now we have further defined the town. You have a statutory town and a census town. Now, if you look at the urban population in states within our country, the top 3 states are Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, where you have an absolute population of 50.8 million and Tamil Nadu drops down to 34.9 million. So, you can see there is a huge difference that is there. And bottom 3 states you have Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram. Now, what are the problems of urbanization within our country? The problems of urbanization remain the same throughout the globe to a certain extent, except for small pertaining things that are prevalent only specifically in our society. So, problem of urbanization is actually manifestation of lopsided urbanization. Urbanization as a process does not have to have drawbacks, because it is only mere movement of population. It is only when it does not happen in a regulated period of time with a regulated supportive infrastructure that these following problems occur. So, you have unemployment, housing, slums and squatter settlements, transport related issues, water supply and sanitation, water pollution, air pollution and now even soil pollution, because all of these effluents from industries finally enter the water table or the soil, which again affects the plants and the vegetables and whatever that we eat. Inadequate provision for social infrastructures like schools, hospitals, etc. Now, if you look at the problems specifically in the central business district or so called the inner city, as more and more people move to the edge of towns and cities, traffic congestion gets worse. Many people will have to drive their cars into the city center to get to work. This is further compounded by people getting brought from the city on these huge highways or motorways. And then these roads then link up with smaller, older, narrower roads in the city center, and this becomes a bottleneck. The highways and the roadways that are currently being designed are all 6 lane, 8 lane. All of that is not an issue with respect to supporting the population. It is only when it is getting connected to the older roads within the city limits that these congestion and traffic issues occur. Some cities have tried to manage this problem by introducing traffic management schemes. These schemes may include park and ride schemes, cycle lanes, congestion charging schemes such as those in Durham and London, carpooling as used in the United States to encourage people to share cars, low emission zones as in London. Now, looking at all this, even our own very capital city is adopting a few of these, like carpooling and developing a congestion charging system. Local councils have also tried to make the roads in urban areas safer by introducing traffic calming pedestrian zones, vehicle exclusion zones, and permit only parking schemes. How do we go about reducing congestion in cities? The park and ride scheme is where people park their cars on the edge of the settlement and then take regular shuttles to the center. So that way, all of these narrower roads do not have to support individual car traffic. In the periphery, you can actually have these designed car parks, multi-level car parks, where the cars can be parked, and then these shuttles, which are battery operated, which will even reduce fuel consumption, can shuttle in and out every 15 minutes. Pedestrian areas, pedestrianized areas are designated as only pedestrian friendly zones. This will even enable people to have a better and healthy lifestyle. Permit holder parking. This means that people must have a permit to park in that particular area. This reduces the number of people driving into towns and cities as there are parking opportunities being restricted. Vehicle exclusion zones. Certain types of vehicles are excluded from certain parts of the city, like large trucks may not be allowed to enter the narrower roads or residential areas. Carpooling, where people are encouraged to share cars. This has happened a lot since the 1970s and 80s in the US. Traffic calming, which is nothing but roads narrowing, adding speed bumps, make traffic move slower around narrower streets, which will ensure safer driving and even lesser road rage. Narrow roads may restrict this type of vehicle that can enter certain parts of the city. Certain other problems in the CBD. Another recent problem that we find is the city center retailing decline, as out of town shopping centers have become more common because of congestion. People prefer going outside the city and shopping, there they can park their car without hassles, shop in peace, and again come back to their homes. So this has ended up having a hollow or empty area called the donut effect, where all the buildings that were before occupied previously are no longer being occupied and becoming redundant, and this leads to a lot of neighborhoods getting degraded. Problems in the inner city. Because of urbanization, there is inequalities in all urban areas, which means there is an extreme difference between the poor and the wealthy, as well as in the people's well-being and access to things like jobs, housing, education. So main inequality occurs in housing, access to services, access to urban land, safety and security. Now, if you look at, you often see people who live in inner city areas have a poorer quality of life, which is ironic, because for commercial areas to work in the inner city, they have to pay a very high rent. So this is because inner cities typically with older housing and declining industries. Here we can see how governments and planners often have to step in and help redevelop rundown inner city areas, inner city redevelopments, which may improve the physical environment of the area and also improve the quality of housing. However, it can also create even greater inequalities because the local residents may not be able to afford there anymore. Often, the old industrial jobs are replaced by skilled jobs and new people move into this area. And at the end of this lecture, we have studied urbanization, emergence of new forms of developments. At the end of this lecture, we should be able to answer the following questions. What is urbanization? Discuss the phenomenon of urbanization with an example. Discuss causes of urbanization. Discuss the pros and cons of urbanization. That brings us to the end of this lecture. Thank you.